Today, we're talking about developer marketing with Adelyn Zhou of Chainlink. One of the great things about crypto is that everything is open and composable. And that means developers can develop their applications using kind of any other blockchain and any other application and compose them in. A game could wrap in another DeFi protocol, and a DeFi protocol could wrap in yet another DeFi protocol to create structured products. And when a project gets a lot of developers using it, it defines an ecosystem. And the blockchains and applications that create large ecosystems tend to have network effects and help the project or the chain persist and create a lot of value for everyone involved. And so it's really important to understand these ecosystems and how projects attract other developers to use and compose that project. But it seems kind of really mysterious and hard how to know if a project's doing that well and how they do it at all. And there's got to be a massive fight for developers. So I'm really interested to learn more about that. Adelyn is an expert on that. And perhaps no company has figured out how to do this better than Chainlink and more deliberately. So Adelyn, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge with us.
Absolutely. As I mentioned, really excited to be part of this podcast and to share more about, how to grow your ecosystem, bring developers and other parts of the Web3 stack right into your community.
Awesome. So why don't we start out by asking you a question about yourself? What makes you such a credible expert on this guide? Could you tell us a little expert and guide on this topic? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and contextualize your role in Chainlink?
Yeah. So I've been in the blockchain space now for, I guess, almost 5 years, which from a tenure standpoint, maybe gives me a viewpoint since I've seen multiple bear cycles now and bull cycles. I've been through it, not all of it, but at least in the near past. In my background specifically, I've always been interested and excited about emerging technologies and how to make them applicable to what we do. And so, how do you bring technologies into full forefront? And so, prior to this, I was working at companies like Amazon. I've also done work in machine learning and AI, and then got really excited about Web3 and got down the crypto rabbit hole, and then have been at Chainlink the last few years. And at Chainlink, I started as one of the very first business people. Chainlink was fewer than 10 people at the time that I joined, and I helped work with our team to think through a lot of the early strategies, the building blocks. How do you get people to understand, what is the Oracle problem that we're solving, and help them understand how Chainlink, could be and is now like a fundamental building block of many developer stacks and many projects. And then I guess for the folks who might not be as familiar, Chainlink is a Oracle, and what we do is we connect blockchains and the dApps on blockchains to APIs, to data, to computation, to systems. Basically, connect what's on the blockchain to things that are outside. And what's outside could be systems like APIs, or it could be another blockchain, or it could be another dApp. And blockchains by itself are not able to communicate externally. And so you need a system like an Oracle to provide that communication layer for the blockchain, the on chain and off chain. And as such, like Chainlink, we have over, like almost 2,000 projects using Chainlink on the base layer, including leading protocols such as Aave and Synthetics and countless different games and insurance. Basically, we power a large part of the Web3 ecosystem.
Awesome. And we go back quite a ways as well. We know
Yeah.
each other a bit from college and business school at
Pre
Harvard. So
Web3,
pre-crypto.
pre crypto. And I feel like my friends, you have the pre crypto friends and then the post crypto friends.
Yeah. And then the few people who were there for both.
That's true. The few people who got the conviction early on to jump into this crazy space.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Okay. So 2,000 projects are building on Chainlink. That is a lot. I mean, maybe we can start by understanding a little bit about the space. Like, how many developers do we really think are out there in total? There's a lot of, I mean, DeFi is complex to use, right? I'm not even sure how many DeFi users there really are. and then you zero into DeFi developers. And I wonder if you have any view on like what the actual size of the space really is.
Yeah, I think the size of developers is, definitely can be much, much bigger. I think the latest reports from Electric Capital and other places pinpointed tens of thousands. I think during the last year, a lot of developers kind of came in and started looking at it and playing with it. We'll see, how many people still stay given the state and the nature of where the industry is today. But I think at least the core people, right, the real believers who we really care about will be here for the long run and are going to continue to build during this time. But I guess their question overall, maybe tens of thousands. So not the millions that we all are working towards to bring in.
Mm. I mean, what strikes me about that is if we're talking like tens of thousands, and maybe the ones that are really serious are measured in the thousands. I mean, you could conceivably have a team that has conversations with all of those, right? So, you think about like developer ecosystems in traditional Web 2 or software, right? And like,
Mhm.
there's just no way that like Google could talk with all the developers that integrate with their services. But in Web3, you actually could. And so it really like in some ways, I guess I'm wondering whether like it's really these days more of a marketing motion or a sales motion as you engage partners,
Yeah.
developers.
I think it's both. It's always been a combination, right? Historically, right, the difference marketing sales is marketing goes out and helps lay and get the brand awareness and let people understand what it is, and then sales can be more much more efficient. And then when you go conversation, if you don't have good marketing, then you won't the salespeople will be starting at the very basics and knocking down on doors that are completely closed. But if you have a good marketing, or in a lot of cases this time, strong developer relations, developers already know who you are. They raise their hand and be like, hey, I'm interested in you. And then the conversation that you have with them, these projects are going to be much, much, much more fruitful. You're not going to start at the basics of what is an Oracle, or what do you guys do. You can dive much faster into why Chainlink, and why is Chainlink more secure, more decentralized, and better for your project. And then to your point about marketing to developers and being a smaller pool right now, I think that's why you see a lot of projects in this space too. We're not just focused on the developers here today, right? If there's tens of thousands, but trying to help bring in the developers from the Web 2 space into the space as well. So there's a lot of education, that we've also helped do to help those developers understand, one, what is Web3, and two, how do you get started building on it, if you are interested. And that pool is massive. Like, just think about all your friends who've probably asked you, Mark, like, should I, what should I look at? How do I get into Web3? What is all that? Like, it's the same thing happening on the developer side. Developers asking their friends, like, how do I start programming? And what, how do I start making a smart contract? What should I do? And so we want to be there for those conversations.
Mm. So I guess there's like two elements to that. One is like penetrating the existing community
Mhm.
and population, and the other is expanding the size of that community and
Yeah.
population. And I guess it makes sense that early stage you just kind of go after the people who already understand the space, and as you saturate that, then you start trying to expand the universe of
Yeah.
potential developers.
Yeah,
Um,
and I see
do
that
you?
especially with projects in the stage that they are in, right? Really early, young, new projects, you don't have much bandwidth to grow the pie, but larger ecosystems and maybe layer ones and blockchains, you have more resources. And so you're looking to expand the pie rather than just make your slice bigger.
Mm. I mean, that seems like a big turning point. And I struggle a lot with this idea of like ecosystem. I wonder how you define ecosystem. Like, at what point does finding a few developers and having a few B2B relationships turn into an ecosystem? And at what point do you decide, hey, like, we got to grow the number of people who even are aware of the space? Like, what are these stages of growth in communities and ecosystems?
Yeah. I mean, I think ecosystem can be a very vague term, right? I think what I usually think about is ecosystem is everybody that can possibly touch a project. And that includes both the core, maybe community, right? Your fans, your crypto enthusiasts. It could include your users. And these might be other projects that use your system if you are a more of a B2D, business to developer project. It can be your node operators, your validators, it could be even your auditors, third party legal firms. Like it can be honestly anybody that's stuck into your ecosystem or your project and helping make it more successful. If you think about some of the layer ones, for example, really important to them might be the investors, like the VCs that are part of their ecosystem because they fund those projects that are on Near or on Filecoin or Solana, and they help make those successful. So those VCs, you could say, are part of the ecosystem as well. Um, and so I would say ecosystems is more broadly defined as anybody that can be supportive and help make your project grow.
Hmm. But it does strike me that like, you know, there are projects where they're selling a service and, let's say it's AWS or an RPC endpoint, and there's some other companies who are using that service and let's say paying them.
Yeah.
And then there's services where they're ecosystems where, and I think that would count as an ecosystem.
Hmm.
And then there's ecosystem where there seems to be this like network effect
Yes.
where people are organically finding new ways to use things. It seems like there's some momentum in and of itself. And when I think of ecosystem, I guess I kind of start thinking about that. And so I wonder if you have any reflections on this. Is there any kind of turning point at which something takes on a life of its own?
I think that when a Terrence takes on lifetime its life, I guess life of its own is when other people can build, and it's not just a customer vendor relationship, but it's one plus one is more than the whole. I think that's what you're saying. And this comes into play a lot of times when you have maybe channel partners and alliances and other BD relationships where a project might not just use you but be built on you, and then others, like you're saying, composability build on top of that. And so I think in the traditional Web 2 space, is much more sometimes of a vendor client, vendor customer relationship. But in Web 3, because of the composability, because of the interlocked nature of the industry, a lot of times you see different people building on top of each other, and then when they're to, when they're all together on one ecosystem, and then that just expands, right? And I think
Mm,
that's the difference.
makes sense. Interesting. Okay. And how do you judge the quality of an ecosystem? Because there's a bunch of different ecosystems out there. You have an ecosystem. Ethereum has an ecosystem.
Mhm.
Uniswap has an ecosystem. Some of these overlap. Some of them don't. But but they're all ecosystems. So how do you judge their health when you look at them?
I think there's a couple metrics. One, how many players are there in those ecosystems, right? Like, what is the actual size? And then, of course, there's the quality, right? How deep are those relationships? How embedded are those ecosystem, I guess, projects, part of that core maybe layer one or core function. So I think it's a combination of quality and quantity together to judge that. And then yeah, and then the quality would be how deep are those relationships, how active are they, and how beneficial is the relationship between the two.
There's this concept in like academia, I guess,
Hmm.
where you're trying to judge like how important is a concept, how seminal is a work.
Mm,
And one way you can do that is just by counting citations,
yes.
right? Like if something's been cited a million times, then like it is probably more seminal than
Mm,
other stuff. And like it turns out like what's the most cited publication ever? It's like the Bible. And like actually, well, not science, that's like pretty seminal
yeah.
in culture and society. There's definitely an ecosystem around the Bible, that's for
Yeah,
sure.
definitely. And in a way, like that, the citation is also kind of like a page rank, right? Of like which website. And so it's like how interconnected
Yeah.
you are.
Yeah. I wonder, are there in developer ecosystems, do you think it's as simple as number of independent companies or developers using a core product that defines the importance and size of that ecosystem? Or do you think there's some other more complex or nuanced
Yeah, I think it's
metric?
definitely more than just the base is like number, right? That's easy. You can be like number of GitHub repos, number of projects,
Mm,
or something like that. But then that goes back to the base of number of customers, right? It's kind of like that. But if you're really trying to judge the health, there's also ways to be like, how many other people are making a successful business by building on top of you? So they might not be actually using your product, but they kind of layer on top of it. Or take the example of the VCs, right? How many other VCs are now very successful funds because they've invested in your projects? Or how many other third party developer dev shops are there building on your agency to build? And you know, how many of those are helping enterprise customers maybe help bring that if that's important to your ecosystem? So I think it's more than just a pure number.
hmm What do you think are some ecosystems, developer ecosystems in crypto that you think are like especially impressive? I would ask ones that you think are unimpressive, but I don't want to make you speak negatively of anyone.
Yeah.
So let's focus on who you think are impressive.
Well, you mentioned, right, Ethereum earlier. I think throughout it all, they have an incredible developer ecosystem. DevCon, the conference they have, is always incredibly well run with really great research coming out of it. And I think that we all look to as a very good organic system. I think Cosmos has been very interesting in the recent few months. They really have shown that they can, band together, and there's all these now app chains that are coming out of the Cosmos ecosystem. I feel like that's really a community bottoms up type of ecosystem that has come into fruition, and it's been exciting to watch that. Polygon, I think they've done a really interesting job of seeding ecosystems across just different verticals. I think Polygon Studios, and then focus on games and their way of working with enterprise and traditional Web 2 companies, I think has been really fascinating to watch as well. And then even Filecoin, I think they have a really interesting like grants program and VC model where I think they work with almost like 400 different projects every single year to help seed the Filecoin ecosystem. So you'll see everyone has a different flavor, but they are all for the same purpose of how do you grow that core ecosystem.
Yeah. Interesting. One thing that strikes me about all of that is that in crypto, a lot of what helps these ecosystems grow is just a massive amount of capital available to help start them. Like in Web 2, you don't have a company starting its own VC firm to invest in companies that use its service, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in crypto, you know, a lot of these places have raised an enormous amount of money or have tokens with an enormous value. And so they can really invest in and support people building in that ecosystem. How important do you think is capital to creating a developer ecosystem in crypto? And how important do you think actual execution of marketing and developer relations is?
I think they're all ingredients, right, into this, I guess, super pie or whatever you want to create, because you can't not have one. Like I've seen some projects are really, really successful because they have lots of external VC capital. But the challenge is if you don't have really core builders, once that capital leaves, like, will these core builders actually stay? And so I think we're seeing some of that play out even in today in these, in the industry. And so I think the capital needs to be there to help accelerate, but then you also want a strong community at the basics, because people who actually care about, you know, your chain or your layer one or two or whatever, because just having capital then doesn't, otherwise these developers or whoever will just follow the money and they'll never stay with you. So you have to have a balance of both.
Yeah, it makes sense. You need missionaries and mercenaries. And if you just use capital, you get mercenaries,
Exactly.
but not missionaries.
Yeah. And then if you have just missionaries, it might take them a very, very long time and they need acceleration. And so then having
Yeah.
both.
Yeah. So you got to convert the mercenaries to missionaries.
Or maybe help the missionaries be a little more mercenary.
Yeah. Okay. So you've done a great job of this. What works? What are the range of things that Chainlink does and what works best?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, what we've done over the years has also changed. I mean, at Chainlink, I was the chief marketing officer for many years, and where we started off is very different even today based on the size, right? So if you're a founder of a small dApp, like what we're doing now, is maybe what you'll do a few years down the road as you get to that stage. But for us, I mean, core, we have developer relations team, and then part of that, we have really strong documentation. That's always been one of the core focuses for us from day one. We want to enable developers, whether they speak to us or not, to be able to just jump in our docs and play around, play in a sandbox, and try it out. That allows your users, right, the developers, to have an aha moment, and that's probably the most valuable thing. From there, we have events, virtual hackathons to in-person hackathons to meetups to conferences. So that's, you can think of all as like developer marketing events. And then on top of that, we work with a lot of third-party developer tools that developers will use in their coding experience or coding journey for creating a dApp. So helping connect with the Moraleses and the Alchemies and various different systems to be part of I guess, that learning experience for a developer and that building experience, so that we're in there and makes it easy. Basically, you just want to help developers have a seamless experience, whether it's jumping the docs or building with us or asking questions in an easy way where there's someone that responds. So I would say we do all of that.
Makes sense. Okay, got it. And are there things that over your journey, because you've, you know, been a pretty integral part of this for a long time, and Chainlink really does have some of the best developer marketing engagement programs I've seen in crypto. Have there been things that you thought would work or that you put a lot of effort into and turned out not to?
I think some of this is still proving out. I think for us, right, do you do paid advertising for getting developers onto your platform, right? Where, do you test out Twitter ads and Google ads or something like that to get, drive awareness of, let's say, your hackathons? But then the developers that do come from those paid ads, are they actually the quality ones that you want? Are they from the geographies that you're looking for? Or are they more mercenary that just want to try to earn a bounty? So I think some of that's still to be played out. Other things, I mean, we've tested so many things. And then also things that might have worked, 2 years ago. And then we pioneered it, and then a lot of other people then have, like you said, have watched us, and I would say replicated and copied a lot of our playbook. So imitation, I guess, is the biggest force of flattery. And then that forces us to continue to move forward faster. So what's worked for us in the past no longer works even today, because everyone else kind of piles in and does the same thing now. So we have to always be probably not just one, but two or three steps faster than everyone else, and continue trying out various things. So things that work probably don't, many of them today. And we're always pioneering the next thing.
Hmm. Are there big mistakes you see other new ecosystems doing in their marketing that you would advise them to lean away from
Mm,
or you think are misguided?
yeah, I think one, I mean, they should probably think about what is the flywheel that they are creating. What is the strategy that they have, right? Are they doing a VC funding play, right? As we said, with some projects, or like they VC funds and then it goes in circles. So then if you're doing that playbook, how do you make sure these projects stay with you, so that when the next VC comes around, that they don't all go leaving and following that? Or are you trying to do a grassroots bottoms up approach? And in that case, how do you support them and how do you accelerate their growth? And so I wouldn't say there's like anything I've seen extremely wrong or anything. I would just advise, if you figure out what is unique to your project. Like, there are so many different layer ones and now layer twos and app chains and subnets and super nets and things like that. So what makes you unique? How are you going to differentiate outside all of the noise that is out there? There's so much content now. There's so many, I guess, influencers. There's so many players. So how are you going to differentiate yourself out of the noise, so that developers come to you, so that you have something different? I would, so that's what I'd say. I would say you can look and maybe replicate some of these successful things you've seen in other playbooks, but then really have a sense and point of view on what makes your project different and how you're going to succeed, and think about what kind of flywheel you can create as part of that strategy.
Makes sense. Can we talk about FTX for a moment? Because we are now all familiar with the story of FTX and SBF's misappropriation and what seems like fraud. One thing he did is use FTX and its capital and kind of market position to encourage Solana as an ecosystem. And a number of projects in Solana. I mean, SBF was really a driver of that ecosystem. And a lot of people, I think, would have said that was very successful. And I wonder if if the ecosystem itself was smoke and mirrors, or if actually it was really healthy. And I wonder if you had a view on that before and now. Like, do you think you can cut through the BS very easily? Because I was fooled for sure on Solana. Um, and I wonder what your views of it as an ecosystem were before and now.
Yeah, I definitely think that they FTX and all the funds like really supported that ecosystem, and so that was what helped them, right? One of the, I guess, the fire or the gas that helped that ecosystem grow. But at the same time, right now, unfortunately, Solana is also pulled down with this whole thing. Even if they weren't involved, they were now implicated because of so many projects being invested in there. I guess the one good thing I've heard is that people were worried about some of the projects that FTX invested in, about clawing back the money. But from what I've heard, it's actually okay because bankruptcy can take 5 years. So projects are not as worried about having their funds clawed back, at least for the next 5 years. So by that time, they would be in the next stage of their growth. So that's one good thing, I guess, lining for
Yeah.
those projects.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's not like anyone's breathing down your neck for monthly financials are going up and to the right if it's just stuck in bankruptcy court.
Yeah. So yeah, if you got your money and you're in a project, you're actually okay for the next 5 years. But beyond that, I mean, I think it's hard to say. I mean, there was some stuff, right, for the other CoinDesk article, I mean, that coin about some of those projects self washing some of the money, right, with on top of each other. You know which I'm talking about, that article that came out about like a couple months ago. So we see some maybe inflated TVL numbers, but that being said, right, they had real developers building on them, and I think that we hope that they can get through this and focus more back to their real building.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting is that what's interesting what you said, right, is that you can do wash trading, right? And you can have a lot of juiced metrics, but actually the number of developers building on them in some sense it's harder to fake that in some ways.
Exactly.
And so it's actually a much better indicator of health than a lot of these other vanity metrics because
Yeah.
it's harder to fake. Yeah.
Yep.
Interesting. Cool. Okay. And it sounds like Chainlink is trying to build other adjacent ecosystems too, right? So you have Oracle price feeds. That's been pretty successful. And it seems like increasingly you're doing cross chain. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, we found that, I guess we started with oracles. That was the whole concept. But the very first use case were price feeds, and very popularized with DeFi a couple of years ago. And then, that still continues to be a super popular product. And then on top of that, we've added VRF, which is verified random numbers, that has been really successful with NFTs and gaming products. We added automation. So a lot of projects are now starting to realize that they've sent many parts of their, I guess, their projects are actually centralized, and the automation part needs decentralization. So that's become very successful as well. And then actually in the last couple weeks, given everything's happened with FTX, one of the products we've had for a long time actually is called Proof of Reserves. And that's been now back in the limelight. People are like, oh my God, yeah, this is what we all needed. And we're like, yes, that's why we've had this project for a very long time, helping people prove the amount of reserves that they have on exchange or in a system. And so I'd say that's become very popular right now. And then in addition to that, cross chain is something that we've been working on, our Chainlink CCIP protocol. And as I mentioned, like oracles, right? It doesn't have to be just blockchain to API, blockchain to data. It can be blockchain to blockchain as well. And what we've seen is one of the biggest challenges to Web3 adoption is the siloed nature of all these different chains. And so we're just taking our expertise in connectivity and bridges, bridging systems and data to apply that to this now multi-chain world through cross-chain solutions.
Makes sense because a lot of what needs to happen in order to do anything between chains is just passing information from one to the other, and that
Exactly.
is ultimately kind of an oracle problem.
Yep.
Why are random numbers so important?
Oh, yeah. Random numbers is actually creating randomness is one of the like a old computer science problem. It's actually really complicated to truly create randomness. And then on the blockchain, it's even harder. Historically, blockchains have created randomness by using like the block hash and different things like that. But that's actually not random because you have that seed, and then you can use the algorithms to go backtrack and figure it out. So randomness can be really important. Let's say you're doing a NFT drop and you want to make sure that the NFT is actually fairly dropped to everybody in the community rather than to friends, especially back in the day when NFTs were, millions of dollars each. And so with Chainlink VRF, you can guarantee the randomness of distribution of that NFT. Same thing goes for, let's say, a loot box in a game, right? Can you make sure that the characteristics in that loot box are randomly generated? And then even other projects like raffles and things like that, how can you guarantee that you're picking winners randomly? And so using a product like VRF can enable that.
Interesting, cool. So very developer native tools that
Yeah.
developers know they need and is actually, very core to what they're building, but might not even be apparent to users of the eventual product.
Mhm.
Makes sense. I want to just kind of ask you a couple open-ended questions about
Mhm.
marketing, since in addition to just kind of developers and ecosystem growth, you've been leading marketing as a whole for Chainlink. But before I ask you that broad question, how have it sounds like you've done paid advertising in crypto. Have you been able to do performance-based advertising? Because my understanding was that Google, Facebook, et cetera, banned crypto-oriented advertising, and
Yeah.
so made performance very difficult.
We do very little of that of paid. I know some projects probably do a lot more. We historically haven't. We do more of the organic channels, but I think if you, so it definitely is challenging for those, and thankfully we're not, in the business of buying lots of users or traffic. For those who do, I mean, there's guidances. You having a really good relationship with your Google and Twitter account rep is helpful. But for a long time, agreed, you couldn't even use the word. It's like DeFi in a ad, and so it's like, all right, or like NFTs, and so you're basically, it's like very complicated to do that, but there are still ways, but you have to do it much more carefully.
Mm. What are the interesting? So the broad question is, what are the other differences between marketing in crypto and blockchain versus in Web 2? And what would you say to marketers who want to get into crypto to help them understand the difference?
Yeah, I would say it has gone a little bit closer than when I first joined the industry years ago. Back then, like Web3 crypto was like a crazier space. Now it's a little bit more buttoned down. There are now more tools. Back then there were even fewer tools. Like in Web2, you had all these marketing tools at your disposal. And then here in Web3, you're like nothing integrates with Telegram or Discord or whatnot. It's gotten a little bit better.
You
Similarly,
can't even trust your Google Analytics.
yeah, exactly. The privacy, concerned people, right, who tend to use Web3, like don't have cookie tracking on. You're using a Brave browser, so how do you track them? So yeah, you have to completely change your mindset on what you're, benchmarked on and what tools you have at your disposal. I would say other things on top of the tools and analytics stack that you use is the focus on community that doesn't really happen in Web 2 very much. I mean, you have a SaaS product and you don't have that often a very fervent community that loves you and will tattoo you on their bodies and will fly cross country for your conferences, right? That doesn't really happen. In Web3, you have that, and that's really a core part of your ecosystem, your brand, and these people, right, who truly are ardent believers in what you do. And that's really, really important. So I would say the focus on community is really, really different. And then last, I would say maybe the order of operations on how you grow could be different. So in Web 2, a lot of times the first people you might hire is a product marketing manager, whereas in Web 3, you might hire a comms person or a community person first, and then build in some of these more traditional Web 2 type of marketing functions. So yeah, so I'd say tools and systems are different. Yeah, the focus on community, and then the order of operations on how you build out a community and how you build out your marketing function is different here.
Hmm. How would you describe community to someone from Web 2?
Mm, I think it's really just your believers and your followers who really live and breathe and love what you do. It's I don't think it's any different than the early adopters who loved Peloton or CrossFit or you know or even like you were saying in the Bible, like a religion. So I would say it's these people who really believe in the vision, the mission, and the values that your project espouses, and they incorporate that as part of their lives, and they feel like they are part of what you're building. And in Web3, it's different too because they can be more of a part of it, right? They can have ownership of the tokens that you have.
Mm,
Whereas in Web2, you can't really do that until maybe a company is public. And even then, it feels very different. Whereas here, you can be part of it. You can get a token, especially if something's a DAO too. You really are part of the decision making process of that. You really have an ownership stake in the success of a project more than you do anywhere else.
mm. Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, there's something around shared holdings and like incentives that I think makes people much more willing to give all of themselves and
Yeah.
identify with a project
Yes.
where otherwise it just feels a little bit more arm's length.
Exactly.
Yeah. Hmm. Awesome. Out of curiosity, are there any books that you'd recommend to people who are interested in the kind of things that you do, or just books that you really love broadly
Hmm.
that you want to recommend?
I would say a book in general that I like. It's not actually Web3 at all. It's by and Mark, you might even take in his class, Clay Christensen. He wrote a book. One, he wrote some amazing books like Innovator's Dilemma and things like that. But one book I really liked was How Do You Measure Your Life? And it takes business concepts and helps you apply them to help you make decisions like what do I want to do with my career, or how much time should I spend with my children, or like how do I choose A and B. And it gives a really cool framework for that. Not quite Web3, but I think it's a good reflective book, and that helps you guide you if you're ever like, what do I want to do with my life?
Makes sense. It is a good book. I'll second that.
Yeah,
So, Adeline, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your knowledge with us. If people want to learn more and follow you or Chainlink, how should they do that?
you can follow me on Twitter, Adelyn Zhou, and then Chainlink. You can follow us at Chainlink. But I guess given where everything is going with Twitter these days, we don't know what's going to happen. So maybe you can find us on our website, chain.link as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.